I feel like somebody who knows what it means to have joy amidst waiting is Ruth. And her story starts with tragedy, but she trusts that God provides, and in the end, she's given blessing. So, summary of chapter 1 of Ruth is about loss and loyalty. So it starts off with Naomi and her husband Elimelech, and their two sons moved from Bethlehem. I want you to remember that. They moved from Bethlehem to Moab to escape famine. Elimelech dies, and later both sons, who married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth, also die. So all three men die. Grieving and destitute, Naomi decides to return to Bethlehem. Ruth chooses to go with her, famously declaring, "Where you go, I will go. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God." So I want to point out a few key points that when I was reading this chapter kind of stood out to me. And the first thing is that they moved because of famine. So I want to ask you guys, what are some reasons for famine? Because when I kind of dug into this, I thought, there's just kind of one reason, but then there's actually more reasons. So I'm putting it up to you. Throw me some ideas. Drought, yeah,
War.
lack of rainfall. War. Yeah, war that destroys the crops, like if the battle is happening in the fields and stuff.
Disease.
Yeah, insect. That's, what do you mean by that, Lana?
I can't quote specific scripture, but hasn't.
Like kind of God not blessing
Well,
people?
like when Elijah said it wasn't going to rain. Well, I guess that's different. Never mind. Sorry.
That's okay. So yeah, plant disease, political reasons. And then the last one that I kind of looked at was that there was rain, but it was at the wrong time. So if you kind of think of even, fields in Alberta of wheat and stuff, you want it to rain during a certain time, but then once you've kind of gathered everything up, you don't want it to be raining because then it's going to rot all your crops and you aren't going to have food. So I wanted to note that all of these reasons, besides maybe the insecticides, they did have insecticides in biblical times that they could have used, but if anybody gardens, we know that is not a foolproof way, and you can still lose a plant even if you spray it. But basically, all these reasons are out of our control. We're not in control of them. So the second thing is that they moved from Bethlehem, which means house of bread. So this is quite ironic that they had to leave the house of bread due to no bread. Yeah. So this shows us that sometimes God allows hardships in our lives that we have no control over. These hardships call us out of the expected, most logical, most secure, familiar places in our lives to move us to where we need to be, even temporarily. We see this in other places of the Old Testament in Genesis 12 and Genesis 46, when Abraham and Jacob both moved to Egypt for a time due to famine as well. And they both left the land of Canaan, which was the promised land, and then had to move to a foreign land. So we see this repeatedly where people in the Bible are called to move out of that place of comfort, out of that house of bread, to an unknown foreign land. And then the next thing I wanted to point out was that they had to give up their land when they would have left it due to the famine. So prior to the famine, the promised land, Bethlehem, all of Israel had been divided up, and your family got that piece of land, and you kept that piece of land that was in your family. But if your crops weren't doing well, you had three options. It was either you had to sell the land, which was more of kind of a lease because it was still your family's name land, except for somebody else was owning it for a time. Or you could sell yourself into slavery to pay your debts, or you could leave the country. So land was very prized by people in that time. It was a source of food, of income and security, and you would only get rid of it if it was dire economic need. So when Naomi returns to Bethlehem without a husband, and she no longer owned land, she would have been dependent on her neighbors for generosity. And this generosity was enforced in the gleaning law in Deuteronomy 24:19 that says, when you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. So God kind of put that clause in there to protect people in those situations so that they would be provided for. So we see this starts off how chapter 2, that this is what Ruth is doing. So in Bethlehem, Ruth, who is the daughter-in-law of Naomi, gleans leftover grain in the fields to support Naomi. She happens to work in the field of Boaz, a relative of Naomi's late husband, so that family name. Boaz notices Ruth's dedication and kindness and treats her generously, ensuring her safety and abundance. So some key points that I found with this chapter was that the first one is that this story happens during the barley harvest, which doesn't seem like really that significant of a detail. But it's interesting to note that 3 major Jewish festivals all happen during the barley harvest, which happens during the Jewish month of, correct me Leslie, but Nisan, which is in March, April. So you would plant your barley in the fall, and then during the cold, wet months of the winter in the Middle East, it would grow, and then in the spring it would ripen, and you would harvest it. So the first festival that happens is Passover. So Passover is when the Israelites painted their doorposts with blood while they were still in Egypt, so that when the angel of the Lord went through and was killing all the firstborn sons, they would be passed over and their firstborn sons would be spared. This last plague in Egypt is what caused Pharaoh to finally free the Israelites. So this festival starts on a Friday night and ends on a Saturday morning. The second festival is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is where they would have eaten unrisen barley loaves to signify the haste and immediate obedience with which they left Egypt. So there's no time to let bread rise. You've got to eat and go. But to point out that it was barley that they would have been eating during this time. And this festival goes from Saturday to Saturday. It goes for a week. The third festival is the Feast of First Fruits. This happens on the first Sunday after Passover. So after that Sunday, that's the Feast of First Fruits. And up till this point, they would have eaten old grain. They would have eaten all the grain from the year prior. And during the festival of First Fruits, they would have used barley as an offering to symbolize that they were going to give their best portion of the harvest to God, and to show gratitude and to show faith that God is their provider. So it was forbidden to eat any of the new grain before this day. So can anyone think of, oops, that was a little too early, sorry. Anyone think of a story about Jesus and barley? Seems a little harder to push.
Barley loaves?
Yeah, barley loaves. So in John chapter 6, he feeds 5,000 people by using a boy's lunch of 2 fish and 5 barley loaves. So in this story, it shows that Jesus identifies with ordinary people and uses humble means to show his abundant provision. So to note, barley is considered a poor person's grain. Wheat would have been what was preferred. So with Jesus using the barley loaves, it's showing that he is connecting with the less wealthy, that doesn't matter to him. And I want to point out that when Jesus performed this miracle, it was just before Passover. It states that in the chapter, that this happened right before Passover. So Jesus did this miracle, which meant he would have been using the old grain during this miracle, the grain from the year before. After he performs this miracle, he leaves his disciples and goes across the lake kind of escapes the crowd because they're wanting more bread. And he says to them, basically, stop looking to me just to fill your bellies. Like, look to me to fill your spiritual need. I'm the bread of life. So, one thing I want to point out, so this is where Jesus is saying, I'm the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. So, one interesting thing to note is that Jesus is crucified on Passover and raises from the dead on the festival of first fruits. So he's showing that he's the new grain, that he's the best portion to God. It wasn't the old grain. Jesus also shows that God provides for Ruth through laws to protect her, and Jesus provides for the crowd of people who came to hear him preach. Jesus provides for us by giving us the new grain of himself, the bread of life. So over and over he shows how he provides for us. So in chapter 3, following Naomi's guidance, Ruth visits Boaz at night on the threshing floor, symbolically requesting that he act as her kinsman redeemer. So to ask for somebody to be your kinsman redeemer would have been so that she could preserve the land her husband and his family, Amalek, had owned. So this role is described in various parts of the Mosaic Law. So these were kind of the roles of the kinsman redeemer. They were to reacquire property that because of poverty had been lost by family members, to redeem relatives that had sold themselves into slavery due to poverty, and also to avenge relatives that had died by the hands of others. So basically, they were there to alleviate wrongs that relatives may have not been able to alleviate themselves. There's another law in the Bible that's complementary, not and or, it's and both, and that is the year of Jubilee. And it's talked about in Deuteronomy 15. So both the Kinsman Redeemer and the year of Jubilee were essentially there to give people a second chance. The differences between them were that the Kinsman Redeemer could be enacted at any time. There was no time frame, whereas the year of Jubilee only happened every 50 years. So that's a long time to wait if you had lost your land and you were in poverty. The second thing that's different is that the Kinsman Redeemer would have had to pay a price to get back that land, to get back that person. And the price was calculated based on how much you had originally paid for the land and how much years of harvest you had lost out on. That would have been minused off that, and that would be the price you would have to pay. The difference between this and the year of Jubilee is that in the year of Jubilee, it was no cost. General, everybody gets back their land. Everybody's freed. There's no cost. So the year of Jubilee was the ultimate and final safety net for the people. So one thing to notice is that in the Bible, it actually never talks about the year of Jubilee being enacted. And on the contrary, in 2 Chronicles, it talks about how people didn't even let their lands sit for the Sabbath year. Every 7 years, they were supposed to let their land sit fallow and show, we trust in you, God. We're going to rest, just like you did on the Sabbath day. And they didn't even always follow that. And it never says that they enacted the year of Jubilee. There is evidence in other countries that sometimes the year of Jubilee would be enacted if there was a new king coming into power. And he would do that. He would free everybody to gain support of the people for becoming their new king. And so the prophets thought that the year of Jubilee would happen with the Messiah, that he would be the new king and he would enact this year of Jubilee. So the first time we hear of this being mentioned is by Jesus, who declares in Luke 4:18 and 19, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has appointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." So how does Jesus fulfill this year of Jubilee? Because he wasn't the king that everybody was expecting. He didn't let all the slaves go free. So he enacts the year of Jubilee by declaring that he offers us complete forgiveness of our debt, our sin. That when we repent, offers us forgiveness of our debt. And this is good news to the poor in spirit, those who know that they need God, versus the rich who don't think they need to be forgiven. So same as the year of Jubilee, it was good news to those who were poor, who had no other option. Yeah. Thank you, Lord. Okay, so then in chapter 4, Boaz settles this matter publicly at the town gate, redeeming Ruth by marrying her. Together they have a son named Obed, who becomes the grandfather of King David. So this is how we tie into King David, bloodline of Jesus. But the points that I wanted to make, so he says, yes, I'll be your kinsman redeemer, and he marries her. So the key points that I wanted to make that when I was reading is that the town gate, I always, in my mind, when I would read Bible stories, I was picturing, like this simple rock opening being like, welcome to our town, that kind of town gate. And I didn't realize that the town gate is actually like a place, and it was where business and legal transactions happened. So it was like official if things were done at the town gate. This wasn't just a welcome to our town sign. So I wanted to point out that another place where redemption happens at the town gate is when Jesus raises the boy from the dead in Luke 7:12-16. So it says, as he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. So kind of similar situation as Ruth. No men to, and in that culture, everything was done through the man. The woman did not have any rights in owning property or making business decisions, things like that. And a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, don't cry. Then he went up and touched the bier they were carrying him on, and the bearer stood still. He said, young man, I say to you, get up. The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. They were all filled with awe and praised God. A great prophet has appeared among us, they said. God has come to help his people. So God has come to help his people. He made laws to protect the widow and the sojourner or foreigner. He has compassion on the poor and the victims of injustice. His plans may not make sense at first, and he may ask us to move to places of discomfort and unfamiliarity, but he will provide for us even in those times. As a summary of this message, Ruth names her son Obed, which means servant or worshiper, which implies devotion, humility, and a deep sense of purpose. And I think that's such a summary of what she learned through her journey of trusting that God was going to provide for her. So the story finishes off by saying, the woman said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a kinsman redeemer. May his name become famous throughout Israel. So while I was working on this sermon, one thing that stood out to me, and I had really been meditating on kinsman redeemer, and in those times, how dependent Ruth would have been on her kinsman redeemer, how joyous she would have been that this was her ticket to freedom. And I'm sure it was not without hardship later. You just married a family member and your husband had still died. It's not like everything was a happily ever after, but it struck me that God was kind of saying, am I your kinsman redeemer? Do you rely on me for your freedom, for your provision? Do I have that same weight in your life? So I wanted to finish this sermon by sharing, a testimony of my own life, where God has been a provider to me. And this is to hopefully encourage you guys to reflect on your lives and when we can reflect on how God has provided for us in the past, it gives us hope for the future, knowing you did that before, you'll do it again. So my life, I moved here when I was 15, and me and Noah met in high school, and we also attended the same church, and we started dating right out of high school, and we spent a lot of time in prayer in our dating lives. We would go and sit down by the river and just worship God together, and yeah, we just really sought him. And on my 18th birthday, Noah proposed to me, and there had been a house that when I moved here when I was 15, I always loved this house. I'd drive past it and be like, oh, it just has a story. There's just something about that house. And he knew this about me. So he had asked the neighbors ahead of time and said, I'm going to propose to my girlfriend. Can we look at this house? And nobody lived there. It had been abandoned for 30 years. The family was just holding on to it for sentimental reasons. It was the grandparents' house, and they didn't want to sell it yet, all the memories associated. So the neighbors said, yeah, sure. And they took us up to the house, and so Noah got up there, and he was like, oh yeah, no, I love this house too. Yeah. So we got married, and then throughout the years, we bought this little house. It was 500 square feet, and we had Lewis in that house. But we always said, okay, if that house ever comes for sale, yeah, that's our house. But we were also kind of unsure. We were like, well, it comes with all this property, and we might not be able to afford it, and it needed a lot of renos, so you got to have some extra money for accommodating that. We even moved to Kelowna for a short time to see, well, maybe this is where we were supposed to be, and within a short time, we were like, nope, moving back. And our little house, we were like, okay, I'm pregnant with our second son at the time, and we're like, this isn't going to work for too much longer. But we kept hitting roadblocks. We looked at a house, and we were like, yeah, this might be it. And then the realtor's like, well, somebody already made an offer. It's not actually for sale. We're like, why did you show us it? And we tried expanding on the house, and the bank would be like, no, you don't have enough equity, whatever, all these excuses. No, can't even add a room. And so 1 month away from giving birth to our second son, I didn't even realize how this story was connected until I was preparing this sermon. But at the time, I had had a miscarriage before Bennett, and before I knew I was pregnant with Bennett, at our previous church, at our care group, had asked for prayer, because I was like, okay, the time's coming to take another pregnancy test, and I was scared, and, and so our church at the time didn't necessarily do a lot of the charismatic things, but that night, one of the people in the care group anointed my head with oil and prayed protection over me and prayed blessing. And it's funny how that timing worked out, because 1 month away from giving birth, me and Noah, it was our 7-year anniversary. And I know, like Crispin, if any of you like numbers, 7 has a lot of significance in the Bible. So it's our 7-year anniversary, and we're driving out to my in-laws' house to borrow tool, because we were doing tons of renos to that little house. And there's a for sale sign on the front yard of this house. I almost made us get in a car accident because I was like, oh my goodness, because it had just been, nope, not for sale, not for sale, not for sale. And we're like, 7-year anniversary, what? So we call the realtor and set up. And then I just want to point out, just that week was mind-boggling, all the details. So the first is that we had a bank appointment that we had booked. Most bank appointments you have to book about a month in advance, and we had one booked for that Monday. So we saw the house Sunday. That's when it became for sale. And we had a bank appointment on Monday. And we had made the appointment because we were like, well, maybe we can try again for expanding. We had all these questions about stuff like that. Had nothing to do with buying a new house. And most of my questions had actually been answered. And I was like, well, maybe we should cancel the appointment. And Noah's like, no, we should keep it. Something's going to come up. There'll be something to talk about. Yeah, like a new house, you know? So that was just crazy timing. And then on Monday, the bank approved our asking price, was going to give us extra money for renos, and said, you don't even need to sell your house. You can keep your current house, and we'll let you buy this house. And in the past, they had been like, no, you can't have this much money for renos, nothing, right? And we're like, what? Now we can have 2 houses? How does this make sense? So, yeah, all of a sudden the doors are just being flung open. On Wednesday, the realtor we had shared this story with our realtor about always loving the house, and so he shared it with the owners, and the owners were like, what? That's you guys? Like, they thought it was a prank. They were like, some 17-year-old guy, I want to propose to my girlfriend. They're like, okay, sure. And they were like, it's you guys? What? And so they accepted our offer, which was below asking price because it did need renos, and they didn't even counter our offer because they were like, we held on to this for sentimental reasons, and clearly you love this house. Like, it's you guys 7 years later. And then on Thursday, we found out from the bank that they were giving a 5% cash back for signing up for a mortgage with them. Like, when does a bank ever just give you free money? They were just like, this is a promotion. And it wasn't a new bank. It was the previous bank. Like, I've never had that happen again. But they were like, here's 5% more. And so now there's even more money for renos. And all of this time, I'm like, stay in, Bennett. We got things happening out here. You know, I'm a month away from giving birth. And then on Friday, we were like, okay, I guess we got to put our other house up for sale. And we were going to go with the original realtor that was the one selling the house we were going to buy, because we're like, oh, keep things simple. But Noah has this thought. He's like, oh, you know what? A few years ago, I talked to one of the friends of my boss, and he's a realtor, and I had told him that if I ever want to sell my house, I should give him a call. And I'm feeling guilty. I should call him. And I'm telling him, hun, it was years ago. Who cares? It's fine. Like, you were just making small talk. He's like, no, I'm supposed to call this guy. So he calls this guy. And in the past, I had also had some worries, like, how am I going to sell a 500 square foot home? Who else would even want this? You know, like, it's so small. And so he calls the realtor, and the realtor is like, actually, I have some clients that are about to make an offer on a house pretty much exactly like yours, but I told them to drive past your house, and they loved it, and they wanted to see it as soon as possible. And so we frantically cleaned, and the next day, they came to see our house. Like, did not have it ready for sale. They came and saw our house and then gave us an offer that was more money than what we were even expecting to get for our house. And we had to sign papers with the realtor because it wasn't even posted for sale yet. And also, they had nothing to sell, so they could move in right now. So sometimes, you know, these things get held up if they have something to sell first. Nope, totally clear. So, throughout that week, God kept reminding me He wants to bless us exceedingly, abundantly, above all we ask or think. And Bennett's name actually means blessing, which we didn't necessarily do because of the anointing. Like, all of these things just come together now. We didn't realize it. We just liked the name Bennett. And so it means blessing, and God abundantly blessed us with Him and with a home for Him. So we were able to move our stuff into the new house before our possession date because it was vacant. It hadn't been lived in for 30 years. And so we moved in on August 5th, and Bennett was born on July 31st. And we had some complications in the hospital after Bennett, which made me have to stay in the hospital for 4 days. God was like, you're going to need some rest. You stay here while your family and everybody moves all this stuff over. So, like Ruth, things may not make sense at first. We were really confused. Why won't the bank give us money? Why did I have this miscarriage? All these questions, right? But when we reflect on God, how God has provided in the past, it helps us in our current struggles. And I'm sure Ruth's story isn't happily ever after, with no other hardship, just like ours did not end the day we got the house. It has been 9 years, if anybody has talked to me, it has been 9+ years of renos, hardships, all sorts of things. We love it, for sure. But reflecting on sometimes just waking up and being like, you did this. It gives you strength for those future struggles. So I wanted to share the last verse that I feel kind of ties it all together, and it's trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and cultivate faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in him, and he will do it. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light and your judgment as the noonday. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. And I wanted to just share a song, and either while the song's playing, as we normally do, we kind of gather into small groups, and I really want to encourage and just pray that God would bring to mind times in your life where he has provided, especially in those ways where you're like, this was all you. I didn't orchestrate any of this, right? To encourage one another, especially if at this point in your life you aren't in that place. You aren't in that place of saying, wow, you're so good. Maybe you're in the opposite place of that despair and that confusion and being like, why are things going this way? So I want us to be able to come together, groups of like 4 or so, to share that. But I want to end with a song, and it can be playing while you're getting into that group.